Hello, this is Lady B, and this week I've decided to give a try something I've been thinking of doing for a little while now, and that's making velvet pumpkins, sort of a last-minute decoration for the Thanksgiving feast that my family will be having in less than a week. So I ran out and I bought this velvet in this beautiful gradient of orange to this almost a white, and I found this craft paper. It was actually wrapped around something I bought that I brought home, but I looked at it and I went, that is perfect, and I'm going to be making the stems out of this. But first I need to make the pumpkins, so that means step one is cutting out my circles. So I bought a lot more than I really need, but that's because I bought a remnant, which got me a really good price on this. This is normally $20 a yard, and I got this for a lot less than that. Part of the reason is not only was it a remnant, it had a stain, but as I told them, I can cut around that. So it's a lot more than I need. But first I need to cut a circle. And the easiest way to do that is going to be to take my fabric and fold it down so that it's squared. And I'm not going all the way to the end because this is where the stain is. I'm thinking, is that going to be the right size? Let's give that a try and see what size I get. Now, velvet is known for crawling, and so normally that would be a problem, but I'm not really worried about it in this case because the nature of this project, my cuts do not have to be perfect. Ooh. Might be able to get a couple of small ones, at least one small one out of that too. So let me cut that as well. My goal is to have 3 sizes. I'm trying to remember how I usually do it. That's right. Fold it in quarters, not in triangles. There we go. I want pins. Pins are your friends when you are dealing with velvet. Very carefully. Pin it before moving it because it will crawl the moment I start moving this around. And you literally want to pin every inch when you're dealing with velvet. Alright, so I'm going to draw from this corner a curve to this corner. And this is just going to be a guide for me to cut. And of course, I have to pull the pins as I cut, and make sure and hold it nice and tight because this will crawl. Every time you cut, every time you move it, every time you pin, it just... If you've ever had one of those little brushes that you use to take lint off that has the velvet on the one side, you'll know that if you brush one way, it will take things off, and if you brush the other way, things will come off. That's because velvet has a nap. But that nap means that when you put it against itself, it will cause it to move. So there I have a circle. It's not perfect. Let me get this down a little further. There we go. But it will work. Now I have to do the same thing for my larger square. So they're cut out. My large one ended up pretty round. My middle-sized one is kind of round, and the small one, I did end up cutting out the small one. It ended up kind of an oval, but that's okay because pumpkins come in different shapes and I can work with it. So I think I'm going to start on the small one just because I think it'll be easier to practice on. So the first thing I need to do is stuffing. Take my ball of stuffing. That is way too big. This may end up being a very small pumpkin. There we go. That looks good. So I have here some brown button thread, and I want to gather that around the stuffing with the button thread. So I'm going to place this in here, and I'm going to grab corner to corner. I'm just going to keep doing this where I'm going to go in each corner and pull it to the center. And now that I have it this far, where I've done it 8 times, I'm going to really quickly tie it off just to make sure it won't all come apart if it breaks. And now I'm going to do it again, corner to corner, working my way around. And now I have it all gathered up at the top. All right, so there's my little mini pumpkin so far. Now I'm going to drop a stitch right through the middle. Now I am not cutting this thread off yet because I'm going to need that. So that's tied, but the thread is staying on. So next step is I have this embroidery floss. Now this is a gradated floss. It was for some project, but not by me. I do not embroider, but my mother and my grandmother did, and they both passed. And one of the things they passed on to me was all their embroidery floss. So let's try this out and see if it works. But my plan is, this might actually be more difficult with it being smaller. We'll see. Is to tie a knot so that it creates the bumps. Now when I bring it under, I'm going to not just cross it, I'm actually going to loop it around on the bottom. Yes, it's working. It is working. Woohoo! I don't know if you can see what I'm doing or not. Pull it through so it's looped, and then tie it to the end that I have left from my first tie. I'll trim this. Now, to secure it, I'm going to put this back through my needle. Got this thread, remember, that I left. And I'll put the needle back on it. So, I want to put my needle, make a loop around all the loops at the top. Then I'm going to drop my needle all the way through to the bottom. I might have to squish it. There we go. Pull that through. Now very carefully, without getting it through the fabric, I need to make a loop where I catch all those crosses on the bottom. So that is secure. And then push it back through to the top. And now I'm going to use that same technique they use for buttons on couches, and I'm going to pull it. And that's going to create a little indent and give you that squished look. And I will secure this at the top and tie it off. There we go. We've got the bottom looking like that. Now the top's messy, but my stem will cover that when I glue it on. And we have these bumps. And there's my first little pumpkin. So now I just need to do the same thing for the other two. And I think I'm going to need a longer needle. And that's it done. The pumpkins anyway. A large one, this is about ½ a yard square before it was cut into a round. A medium-sized one, which was about ¼ yard square. And this little one, which was probably about 1/6. So that gives you an idea of the sizes. Now, a couple of things I figured out as I was doing it. One is you want to, as you put the embroidery on, you want to loop it around all the way from the back to the front and then back again as you go around each way. That way you get a really nice tidy bottom. On the bottom, these little guys, it doesn't matter so much, but on these big ones, it will show if you don't keep it nice and tidy. Now, for sewing the top, I found that it worked best if I first did the 2 corners and then the 2 corners looped and tied it and knotted it off, which left me with this kind of square. And then I would go around, grab that corner, and then loop in the center, the knot that I'd created in the center, and then grab the next one and loop in the center. And so each time I went around, I looped. Now, after I had done that with the 4 corners, now I had 8. And I again tied it off in between, and then I would do opposite corners with the 8, but I would loop in the center every time again. And after you do the 8 corners and you're to 16, just go clockwise, looping around in the center each time. You're going to create this thread knot. And this is why I used button thread. I wanted something really secure. And it seems to have worked really well. And I have this really hard spot here in the center, which I think will take glue really well. So here's hoping, because it's time to make the stems. I have changed into my painting shirt because this is going to be messy. So the first thing I need to do is take my paper. I'm going to rip this in half. And I'm going to cover it in ModPodge. And I want this wet. Now I picked up this idea from a YouTube video, and I will put a link in the description to it if you want to see the original. Now I want a thick stem for my really fat one. So I'm going to take this straight edge and I'm going to start twisting it. Here, I'll try and keep this where you can see it. I'm trying to get this nice and thick for my large one. Now that that's all, I'm going to twist. It's all on its own. And I want that about right there. That looks like a good size. And then I have craft scissors. I'm going to cut up the center of my gathering. That's a good start. I can rip it, maybe. Sure try. Ripping this bottom part up to try and create, there we go. I want that ragged bottom on it. Take each of the bits that comes off and I make twists. And there's one of my stems. And here they are, 1, 2, and 3. I let them dry overnight because, well, they just needed to dry overnight. Make sure they're completely dry before painting. So before I paint them though, I want to trim my stems. I'm going to place them on the respective things and see, like that needs to be cut right there. How does that look? All right, that one is trimmed. Okay, so it is time to paint. The reason I was so excited about having the green paper is that this way, if there's a part that isn't covered by the paint, I'll have the green showing through. And I'm actually going to try and keep some of this green. But the first thing I want to do is paint my dark green. This is a English ivy green. It's a very dark color. Now I don't need to paint the bottom here because that's actually where it's going to be glued down. But I do need to make sure I get the edges that might show up when it peeks up. And now I have this light nutmeg brown. And I'm not going to hit all of it with the brown like I did with the green. I'm actually going to paint it in a sort of a spiral to match the pattern. Just hit parts of it with the brown. There we go. That's it. That's all the brown I'm going to put on it. Now I'm going to let that dry and do the other two. And after that's dried, I'm going to dry brush it with gold just to give a little bit of sparkle so it matches my pumpkin a little better. So now that I've painted that in the two colors, I'm going to come back with my dry brush. Dry brushing is painting with as dry a brush as possible. You put very little paint on the brush, your brush is dry, it's not wet, and you just brush it over the very surface. So I'm going to dab it on my paintbrush. I'm going to brush off as much as I can on the side. Then I'm going to, on a dry paper towel, I'm going to brush off some more so that all that's left is the barest amount on my brush. And then I just flick it over the surface, and this hits all the top surfaces. Doesn't paint the whole thing, it just hits the top. That leaves the shadows inside. And this is going to add that shimmer I want so that it will match my velvet. And you can see the effect I'm getting right there. So I'm going to do this for all of it now. So I'm going to do this on all three, and then it will be time to assemble. So the paint is dried, and now the only thing left is to glue these on. I'm using a low-temp glue gun because low temps work better on fabric. Now, living where I do, this means these cannot go out into our garage for storage because it gets hot enough here in the summer that a low-temp glue will actually remelt in our outside temperatures. But I'll just stick that on there. And I've taken a few minutes to figure out exactly how I want these on. See if I can remember. Because once it goes on, that's it. There we go. Now you do have to work quickly with low temp because it does cool very quickly. There we go. First one is my little pumpkin. And I'm trying to match up the little spines to my areas where the string is pulled so that it looks a little more natural. And that's it. My velvet pumpkin. Oh, that looks good. And there it is done. The large one. the medium-sized one, and my small one, little guy. You see what they look on the top. They turned out so good. So much better than I even hoped. And it was so easy. I was honestly surprised at just how easy this is. I don't know what took me so long to give it a try, because I thought it would be harder, but it's not. And they just, look at them. Aren't they beautiful? If you enjoyed this as much as I did making them, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Until then, whether making velvet pumpkins or other holiday crafts, don't be afraid to suit yourself and make whatever it is exclusively you. Let's try this again. La la la. So, when I said this was going to get messy, I was not joking.